Excuse me.
Order!
All other conversation, please cease. It is now 1:45, so if we can regather. I must practice that and try that again sometime. That worked quite well, didn't it? There is a kind of a register of attendance circulating in the form of a current membership list with a blank column in which you can sign, tick, or otherwise indicate that you have attended. And that's circulating somewhere over in the general direction here. If you can just make sure that goes all the way round and ends up back at the front. There is a block at the bottom which is blank for non-members. Non-members are perfectly welcome to sit and attend all the way through the meeting. You're just not allowed to vote. Now it does actually in the narrative say, and if you're interested in becoming a member, well, you may or you may not be, but just put, if you are in attendance, put your name in there anyway, and we'll sort that matter out later.
Thank you.
Am I going to need that, James?
No, just in case we do.
Oh, yeah? All right. Just in case. Can I just shout as an alternative?
Yes, yes.
You may recall a scene in Blackadder if you're a fan. So it's not down to tactical military genius, Your Lordship. No, it's all down to shouting. Shout, shout, and shout again, says Wellington, played by Stephen Fry. Right. I think we're almost there. Almost there. I'll carry on wittering on while the last few coffees are served and collected. The first thing to say is welcome. Good to see what I'm pretty sure looks like a quorum here. And so welcome one and all, and as I've said, welcome whether you're a member or a non-member. You're perfectly entitled to sit even as a non-member and contribute and talk in the meeting. You just can't vote as and when we get to any votes. The attendance register we've dealt with. And I'm not sure there's anything else in particular I need to cover, is there?
I think so.
Except one thing. As most of you will know, I'm stepping down after many years as playing different roles within the Council of Trustees. I'm stepping down for reasons of health, and I just wanted to say a personal thank you to all the trustees I've worked with over the years and all the personal support and encouragement I've received from many other members in the church in that time scale. I won't bore you with the statistics, although I can do if you wish, but it's been many years, many sets of accounts have flowed under the bridge. Right, that is everything I want to say. Alan will deal with how we're going to conduct the elections as of when he gets to those, and I think everything else can be left until we come to that item on the agenda. So Brian, where are you, Brian? There you are.
You can go.
And just quickly, so I have warned you in advance. You've noted it. Good. Brian will open in prayer. Oh, and I should have said, I know we've welcomed Claire separately, but it is very good to have you here, Claire. Technically, Claire is standing in for Terry. On the other hand, she is really a trustee of this church, having delegated that role to Terry under the powers given unto her. So, slightly complicated way of saying you're able to vote if you want.
Shall we just commit the proceedings to God's care and ask his guidance? Father God, we've heard a lot about words this morning, and so we ask that you would guide us in our words today. Would you help us to navigate through all we need to do in business, but also guide us by your Spirit that we might move forward. Just be with us now and bless us, we pray. Amen.
So that moves us to item 3, and Margaret is there's Margaret. If you want to use the podium, anybody coming up to speak separately, if they could use that podium and lectern it.
Yes, thank you. There have been some changes since the last ACM in May, when then in May our membership stood at 102 members. And during that time there have been 6 leavers. The Ashtons were removed previously. Marjorie Terry unfortunately passed away. We've tried desperately to locate John and Lorna Eastwood and haven't had any success, so they've been removed as well. And Elaine Bamber has now moved to be in a care home in Scotland to be near to her daughter. But I'm pleased to say that we have welcomed 6 new members to our church family. Ellie Armstrong has now become an adult member. Jill Jowett, who we all know, is a lay reader. Bill and Pat Kirkpatrick, who live just below us here, have joined us, and so has Karen Jenner and Alex Duxbury. So that's 6 new people. So 6 in, 6 out. Our membership still stands today at 102. So that's good. At this time, I think it's good to give thanks to those who in any way have served to support church activities in its widest sense. And I think you'll bear with me if I say it's impossible to single out everyone by name, but yet appropriate to mention some people, key changes that have or will take place. And I mention Anne Barker, who has retired from work with the AV equipment. Christine Cubitt, who's helping Jackie Burrows with safeguarding issues. James Huntingdon, our technical guru, who was retired as a co-opted trustee and is seeking election as a full trustee. He's led his team into the ever-increasing use of technology. To Alan Brown, who is retiring as Secretary of the Trustees, always so very, very efficient, long-suffering, and so very, very patient. To Anne Brown, who is retiring as a co-opted trustee, worked tirelessly, leading the worship and teaching pillar group, organising themes, speakers, online worship programme, and the house group programme. To John Lees, Rowena Gillow, Jackie Burrows, Jill Jowett, Anita Armstrong, Julie Smith, Anne Brown and James Huntingdon for their contribution to online magazine-style worship programme. Thank you. And to Julie Smith, who is now retiring as a trustee, and she's training to be a local preacher, and wish you very well in your ministry, Julie. You know she's been involved with all aspects of life here. In particularly, she's led the hospitality pillar and is responsible for setting up a highly successful cafe. The Church in the Garden project was her idea, and together with the team, this is already proving to be an important community feature. And Richard is retiring and stepping down. He's been involved with this church for a long time, serving in many, many roles. Just to mention a few: as a trustee, and latterly as chair of the trustees, as treasurer, in fact, our finance guru, with the assets and finance pillar representing us at Methodist meetings, and also as a church warden, and just in general in the life of church. Over the years, he has made an outstanding contribution to this church. His time and his dedication have been absolutely relentless. And those of us who will remember in September in 2016, when we launched the building fund for the redevelopment of this church, he had this amazing vision for our future. And it is with his enthusiasm and total commitment that he drove us on with determination. There was no going back. We had to succeed. And this is the result. Richard, you've given us so very, very much. In appreciation, we can just say a humble thank you. Thank you for everything that you've done. It has been my pleasure to serve with you. Wish you well, the future, and we will pray for you. And behind every successful man, there is a woman. And we pray for you too, Sharon. And finally, a vote of thanks for the considerable work done by any trustee that I've forgotten to mention, or to volunteers not mentioned specifically above. Thank you.
Thank you, Margaret. Although I thought the choice of adjectives like relentless and driving, I thought was very well chosen. And yes, once you've started, there's no going back. There is only. Anyway, thank you for that. To which I want to add, it's not a popularity contest. It never has been. I think we move now to a review of the year. There is, I don't know how closely it's going to be based on it. There is a separate document which forms part of the accounts called the Trustees Report for the year, which you will have had circulated, and that's being filed with the statutory accounts. It concentrates on the accounting period, in other words, the year January to December 2021. I think yours is going to be a sort of picking up some themes from there.
Yeah, just a few comments on...
And looking forward.
Just a few comments on the document, which hopefully you've had sight of electronically or physically. It starts with the line, administrative information, the Eldwick Church is a single congregation. That's the paper you're looking for. The Eldwick Church is a single congregation. So hopefully you've seen sight of that report, and that phrase that starts it is a good place, I think, to start, because that's what I saw when I first looked through the window and peered in during the summer of 2021. Now, that sounds a little bit creepy, doesn't it? I wasn't actually peeking into the window, but I was online, obviously having a look around, as you do when you think you might be heading in this direction. Now, we had 18 months of pandemic by then, last summer, and my first impression of the Eldwick Church was through my virtual window. So that was how I was able to see. And Terry, Claire and myself were not here for most of 2021. We kind of came together as a sort of a threesome in the end, didn't we? So much of what we can reflect on is only observation since we came. And for me, that's only since November, if we're looking at last year. But what I have found since I've arrived is a lot of cake. Lots of cake and more cake. I did wonder where it was going to stop. But then people got working and realised you work it all off by digging out in the garden and things like that. But a fantastic group of people with passion and commitment and with different views. Show me a church that doesn't. I was, however, a little disappointed to find that there weren't more Liverpool supporters. But it's your loss. But today I actually sat in the church service for the first time in 6 months without doing something at the front. And you are rich. You have an amazing rich. We've talked about some of the things which have brought Eldwick Church to this place at the moment. But I use that phrase in that we have so much here to be thankful for. And I think this report is one of thanksgiving to me, considering where we've been in the pandemic. So the report you see in front of you covers the whole year, but so much of it is a record for me to read and for Claire and for Terry to read as a record of your experience of what being church was like. So I want to say thank you again for its preparation and also for what it contains. Now you'll see in the middle of it, if you flick to the middle, there's a summary of activity within the 3 core strategic objectives of church, which are developing confident Christians, growing the church, and serving the community. And all this that I read within that is impressive because it's been done during difficult times. There have been highs and lows. It's hard to highlight any specific event for me, I think, because I wasn't there for most of it. But I wonder what's yours as you read that. What is the thing that stands out? Where do you see God at work as you look through the window of this report? So you've been on a journey, and one I observed the middle of through this virtual window. It's not a journey any of us chose to be on. Who would have predicted anything like this 2 years ago? The fact is, it's not surprising that we still feel a bit unease at times, because the trauma of what a church has been through, any church, shouldn't be underestimated. But on this journey, like any journey taken by Christians, like the 2 travellers on the Emmaus Road, we don't walk it alone. We walk it with Jesus, and we share a gospel of resurrection hope as we look forward. So in answering the question of where do we go, we do it together, and we do it going forward. You'll be electing your trustees for the next year in a moment. They need your support. They are a hard-working group of people. So can I ask you to pray for them and also to recommit yourselves with them for this work that we are all called to do? And together, let's not look inwards, but let's look outwards through the window, because the world outside, that is where our mission ground is, and that's where the people are that we are called to serve. So I kind of let this report speak for itself, really, because it speaks volumes of you, and I think it is an amazing opportunity for us just to say thank you to God. We, of course, don't do this work in isolation, Eldwick. We can practically pray together. And I think it's poignant that at this time, the leaders of the Methodist Church, the Anglican Church, and all of the denominations are asking everybody to pray for the 10 days between Ascension and Pentecost, to pray, Thy kingdom come. And if you haven't seen that campaign, just Google Thy kingdom come, you'll find it. As we seek to ask God's guidance for his kingdom to be grown in Eldwick. So I really want to just leave it at that, if that's okay. That's my picture. That's what I got from reading this document, and I hope that you are encouraged by it, because it's an amazing story that is told. So thank you for those that put the words together.
I don't know. The microphone is
right.
obeying the laws of gravity here, so
Move it.
hopefully you can continue to hear us. If you can't, shout out. Which brings us on to the elections. But before we do that, can I just take a check on where exactly just at the back. So it is working. It is working its way round, is it?
Yeah.
Jolly good. Jolly good. Because it is important that we have a certain number of people present, but a head count has just revealed that we probably have slightly in excess of that. For any vote to be valid, we need 34 people here, members and voting. Right, it's the Alan Brown Show.
Oh, wonderful. I would just like to take this opportunity to go off-piste and say what a privilege it's been to be working with the trustees and, for that matter, with the tech people without having to actually do very much, but watching all the hard work and amazing ingenuity, creativity, just commitment that's been there. And it's been a privilege to be closely involved. And this last couple of years has thrown up some very big challenges, and I think it is, with great thanks to God and to quite a number of key people, that so much exciting progress has been made. However, we are moving on now. Are there any questions about the elections, co-option of trustees, other elected roles, and or participation in and operation of pillar groups? Any other governance queries? The question was there on the agenda if anybody wanted to raise anything. Good.
Can I just say then?
Yeah.
Can I just say one thing?
Yes. Wait till you get there.
It is about getting there. Before we come to the election, my name has been put forward for an election. The last 3 weeks, my mobility has let me down dreadfully. And I'm just hoping that things are going to improve. But if I cannot get around, if you feel that I might not be able to do a job satisfactorily, well, just crib my name off any proposals. But that's how I feel. I want to give my best, but I feel that I'm a little bit limited. But if you would bear with me.
Right. Well, thank you, Margaret. So, moving on. First of all, there is the election of 3 trustees, and the notice was up on the board, and there are 3 names of people nominated. Jill Jowett, proposed by myself, seconded by Maureen Studholme. James Huntingdon, proposed by Anita Armstrong, and seconded by Chris Richards, and Margaret Hartley, proposed by June Mellison and seconded by Sandra Brown. So, are there any other nominations for the posts of elected trustee for 3 years? In that case, I believe I can declare these 3 elected, with grateful thanks to them for offering this service and commitment. And as Brian said, please do pray for them.
You want to explain about co-opted trustees?
Oh yes, there are also, there is a provision for co-opting,
Up to 4.
Up to 4 trustees at any one time, and they are co-opted for up to a year. But that is the task of the elected trustees. If they feel that there are gaps in capacity or ability or knowledge, skills, whatnot, they have the ability to co-opt people to be on trustees until the next annual meeting.
And we certainly have some vacancies in those areas, and usually we've had at least 7, or previously the capacity was another 2, making 8 in total. And we've always had 7 or 8 at least. We do certainly need others to step forward to the elected and ex officio trustees to offer their services. Otherwise, we are going to be seriously short-handed on the trustee front.
Right, thank you.
And just to explain, if you weren't following the numbers, apart from the 4 elected trustees, the 3 we just elected, Sue Huntington continues to serve until the next ACM, I think, yeah, Sue, yes, as part of a 3-year term. And both Terry Keane and Brian are co-opted trustees, ex officio trustees rather, representing each of the participating denominations.
Right, so moving on, we are to elect church wardens and senior circuit steward. Now, previously, we've had 2 church wardens, and it's seemed right to have a senior steward and a church warden. I suppose technically, as we are all Methodists, all members of the church are Methodists as well as Anglicans, anybody could stand for the senior steward, couldn't they?
Or indeed anyone could stand for the church warden.
Anybody could stand for the church warden, yes. So those roles it helps in our involvement in the 2 denominations if we've got those 2 roles. So we have one proposal for the role of church warden, which is Margaret Hartley, proposed by Margaret Richards and seconded by Phil Barraclough. We do not at the moment have any nominations for the post of senior steward. So is anybody willing to put themselves forward as a senior steward? I wonder if it would be helpful, Claire, if you could just sort of outline what you would see as a senior steward doing, just in terms of the Methodist angle of things.
I'm very much of the mind that the person who holds that title is part of a team and not having loads of glory because they have the word senior attached to them. But there are practical things that in a Methodist church the senior person would do to make sure that everything else is running smoothly. I'm not really clear on how everything works here. It just seems to work, and that's very good for me. But I think having somebody who says that, you know, I will take that Methodist role within this church, should that person be called upon, it might be that person is the person to be contacted if there's anything specifically Methodist that needs to be thrown in your direction from the circuit. But I think, you know, having someone in that role that works alongside the church warden seems to be a good positive thing, and I'd be very glad to see someone stand up and take that role. However, it's unpacked in the year ahead.
Yeah. So, bearing all that in mind, is anybody willing to propose somebody, which hopefully that you've checked with them, or can check with them, even whether it's a nod and a wink, or an arm twist, or anybody willing to stand, who can then, I'm sure, will have eager proposers and seconders.
And just to add, it's not mandatory, it's not absolutely essential that either the church warden or this senior steward role is necessarily a trustee, but it certainly from a practical view helps enormously if they are. John?
May I volunteer
yet you may. Is there were other sort of nudges and winks going on in the background? Are we happy with that? Is there a proposer and a seconder? Are there? So who's proposing it? He can't propose himself.
All right, so you're proposing, so then somebody needs a second. Right, Anita. Right.
Are there any other candidates, either for that or for the church warden role?
Right. Well, in that case, I can declare Margaret and John elected. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And then we have Airedale Circuit meeting representatives. So the Airedale Circuit meet and representatives of the various churches in the circuit meet. And yes, that would be good. Yes, if you just say what's involved.
Yes, at the moment we have 2 down on the list, which was kind of the old arrangements before you created the chapel church. What structure?
To be quite honest, I'm still learning the structure of the chapel and church system, and so I'm assuming if you've got 2 on your list, that 2's fine. But it is really important that when we meet as a circuit, which is I think 3 times a year generally, unless there's an emergency to make a quick decision. We had an emergency for something, I can't even remember what it was, just before Christmas, and we did it on Zoom on that occasion, so we could just pass some things that needed to happen. But we generally meet physically 3 times a year and talk about where the circuit's going and what are the priorities for us, and allow people to bring suggestions and generally move ourselves forward. So it's really important that every church that we are part, that is part of our circuit, has some representation at that meeting, so that they know what's going on and can feed that back to the church that they belong to. So
clearly, whichever Methodist minister has been assigned to the LEP is obviously a member and represent.
Yes.
Brian's predecessor, Peter Mayer Smith, was also a kind of an ex officio member, as was I as treasurer, and then we elected 2 separate reps. Now,
that makes sense.
Quite sure whether the structure changes as a consequence of having 3 churches covering 15 chapels or not.
I think as an independent body, not part of a multiple chapel thing, that your representation won't have changed. The churches that, for example, I'm minister of Craven Church, which is 5 chapels working together, and their church council has nominated, and I can't remember the number, but so many reps from that meeting to be part of the circuit meeting and feed back to Craven. So it does means that not every chapel is represented, but as we work together as one church, then that's how that happens. But as a church that stands alone, I think your representation will be the same.
Right. Okay.
So it would be a dreadful shame, wouldn't it, not to have representation from the Eldrick Church on the circuit meetings. So is anybody willing to stand as a representative for those 3 meetings a year? Carleen, thank you. Somebody to propose?
I propose.
Richard?
Oh, I'll second that.
Right. And anybody else willing to join Carleen in that? Thank you. I bet you have.
Somebody's got a car.
No, if I've got a car, I don't drive at night. We'll make a plan.
You make a plan.
The treasurer will take you, whoever he or she may be.
So somebody to propose Maureen and Sharon. Right, thank you very much. And there is one role which didn't quite make it to the agenda, but that is the role of the Deanery Synod representative. And the Deanery Synod meets 4 times a year normally in an evening, and usually there is a theme. Last time it was about the environment and sustainability and how churches can become more green, basically. And I get Brian goes, don't you? So is anybody willing to go? It can be quite interesting sometimes.
Oh, what a compelling case he makes.
No, it is actually. It is quite interesting to see what's going on. Also, it is part of the whole, which I guess is probably true also with the Methodist system. It's a part of a system of government where the churches elect people to the Deanery Synod, and the Deanery Synod, I think this is right, elects people to the Diocesan Synod, and the Diocesan Synod elects people to the National Synod, and so you have a sort of tiers.
You have a similar structure.
Tiers of government, yes. No, but it is interesting and important. So, anybody willing to join Brian on 3 or 4 evenings a year, somewhere in the locality? Will you? Thank you, Monique.
How far away does she live?
Great. Somebody to propose? Do the thing formally. Sharon? And second? Sandra? Great. Thank you very much. And that is the elections done. Thank you. And thank you to all those who've been willing to stand to those various posts. Over to you.
Over to me. Oh, it's the finance show. The really interesting bit of the meeting. I keep being told. Right. There's a string of things on here which we'll work through gradually. Firstly, there's the statutory accounts. You need do nothing more than note and accept them. They have been independently examined, signed off in March by the independent examiner, and Alan and I signed I'm not sure if it was Alan and I, or did you sign the Trustees Report?
Yeah, I think.
Yeah, both the Trustees Report, which is part of the document, and the accounts themselves, which we kept as a separate document this time, have been signed off in the appropriate places. So it's really just a question of, you've seen the papers, you've been riveted by them, intrigued by some of the details within them, spotted the anomalies. Have you got any questions? Or are you just happy to say, noted? And I should just add, they have now been filed with the Charity Commission, and copies sent both to the circuit, to Edwin, and to the Archdeacon on behalf of the diocese. So they've all been lodged in their appropriate places. Which brings me to point 2. We need to appoint formally, and this is a sort of resolution, that this meeting appoints an independent examiner for the financial year ending 31st December 2022, and the proposal is we stick with the lady that we have used for a number of years now, Emma Bailey of Bailey Wilson. Who also processes our payroll and other little bits and pieces for us. Right, moving swiftly on. This isn't strictly, well, this isn't at all 2021, but I threw in for your extra delectation and delight, the management accounts for the first quarter of the year, which is income and expenditure account, balance sheet, and some comments on it, which will pick up in due course. Again, it's a question of either, essentially, in the first quarter, we're either very lucky or it's incredibly good budgeting. I know which I subscribe to, but it's with... I don't think I've ever done a budget that came out so close to budget, so there must be compensating ups and downs within it. Are there any questions on the figures, which basically show that we have made a significant surplus in quarter one? But before you get carried away and think, oh, that's fantastic, if we make that in every quarter, we'll make 15 grand surplus this year. No, we won't. The front end is rather heavy with some grant monies that came through and have been credited in that period. So there's and a large and generous donation that more or less accounts for that surplus. The rest of the year, as you can see, is designed, the budget was calculated to come out more or less at break even. So these surpluses will unwind as the year progresses. Although we've got a nice little bonus for quarter two, the 1,750. I think you may have seen publicity about it in the news sheet, but out of the blue, we got given, we didn't have to ask for it or apply for it or anything, we just got given £1,750 by Shipley Volunteer Services, which was BMDC money made available for those who had made a contribution during the pandemic. And in a funny sense, we hadn't made the contribution for which we got remunerated, but we did sort of constantly say to Shipley Services when they put out a call, yes, you can use us as a food bank, you can use us for this, as an emergency cafe to prepare meals, but etc., etc. And they never quite got their act together, and they never quite got to use us for any of those things. But they thought we'd been so willing, we deserved something, so they gave us £1,750, and that will come through in the next quarter. Yeah, we've plans to spend it on certain things as well, unfortunately. Right, so no questions on the detail of the figures. I think that brings us to something I wanted to bring up, which is the car park surfacing. There's been it's never been absolutely perfect, but the time has never been right to do much about it during the pandemic particularly, and when we've had other repair bills to face, making this building watertight. But we've reached that point where it's an issue, a number of people feel it's an issue, would like to see something done about it. So firstly, where are we up to on it? We've had a series of conversations. I think Ian's gone, isn't he, Ian Gillow?
Yes.
Yeah. So mixture of myself and Ian have spoken with the architect who acted on the building project, with the quantity surveyor who acted for us on that. They in turn have talked to the builders. We've had a surfacing contractor come and look at it, give us a quote for basically putting tarmac down over the top of it, having filled in the holes and indentations first to try and create a sort of a reasonably flat plane. We're currently engaged, because I think we have some concerns about, okay, we do that, but where exactly does all the water flow? Does it really all flow towards the drains which start at the gate? There are no drains beyond that in the car park. And this individual has made some recommendations. Firstly, that quite a lot of waste will have been washed off the surface into the existing drain. He believes it needs to be cleaned out and probably rodded. before any surfacing work is done. He's also recommended some additional drainage channel to be cut to, because there is a bit of a slope to the back end of the car park, although not as pronounced as there is to the gate side driveway part of the car park. We have got a quote for the surfacing. We haven't yet, because this was literally only last week, been able to engage with somebody to say, well, there's this additional scope to the works. How much more is that going to cost? But at the moment, the bill stands at, well, with a 10% contingency, approximately 20,000. The advice of the QS is, I'd be really horribly surprised if it reached 30. You're probably looking at somewhere in between So very roughly speaking, we're going to have a target of about 25,000 quid to find to do that car park. There simply isn't enough in reserves to meet that and continue to adhere to the reserves policy. It will require some separate fundraising, not necessarily every last penny of the 25,000, but it will most of it will need to be fundraised. So I wanted to throw it open to the meeting to ask questions like, firstly, how urgent do you think this work is? How high a priority do you place on it? Should we proceed with it as a project? And if so, who's going to lead the fundraising? And report into the assets group on it as part of the group that makes it happen. So, thoughts, questions?
Can I just say one thing? It's just a thought, but thinking about it in isolation might not be the best thing, in that there could be other priorities that could come along, and all I'm thinking about is, and there's no proposal in here or anything, but is children and families work, whether we need any help in that area. So that's just something that's on my mind at the moment. We've been talking about it. I've been having lots of discussions with other churches who are going down the route of getting some help. So it might be something we want to think about if we're thinking about bigger figures. That's just to balance things, perhaps.
Julie?
Yes, please.
Yeah.
Or can we take the mic too?
You can take those hands online.
Does it work?
Yes.
I know probably more than many the mess that comes in from the car park into here, because I replace the vacuum bags, and I vacuum as well. So I do know the problems of the car park, but I just wonder whether there's a different option in that we can fill. It's not ideal, but we fill the holes up, and I know that was a proposal before to have some I don't know what you call it, the rubbly stuff. The gravel stuff, and then you just fill the holes in, and eventually the cars pound it down and get rid of the dips, which cause the worst problems because it splashes everywhere. I personally agree with Brian that, given the situation in the Ukraine and the fact that we're desperately trying to bring children and young families back into our church and grow our church younger, that I just don't feel I would be able to personally be involved in fundraising for a car park. I'd be very happy to shovel gravel into those holes. I don't have an issue with that, and I don't have an issue hoovering as many times as it needs. You'll know if you look at the carpet well enough, we've got a lot of tarmac on the carpet. When they resurfaced the road outside, there was nothing we could do about that. But I personally think it's not just about a car park and a building, it's about the people that are in it and how we grow it. Thank you.
So a sense there of both parties saying, well, there may be higher priorities here if we're talking about, if we're going to go out and do significant fundraising, is this the best cause? Is there a sort of counter voice to that says No, but it really is important because so it doesn't sound as if there's a tremendous. I mean, we have had quite a lot of representations on this subject, some of them fairly forceful, but it doesn't sound as if there's tremendous enthusiasm within this group, at least, to say, yeah, let's get behind that, go out, raise 20 grand. And by the way, it just occurs to me, when we were fundraising for the building, 550,000 out of 920,000 came from grants. But you were appealing to people to say, what we're trying to create is a community hub, a place where members of the church, but also those of no faith, can come and enjoy and use as an amenity. It will be a community asset. That's though we're not going to be able to claim that for a car park. So the money, wherever it comes from, is my guess would be very unlikely to get much in the way of grants for it. Brian will tell you, how many car parks have you got at your other two churches?
Well, very quickly, but the three churches I came from to here, we didn't have any car parks. We would have not died for that one, but you know what I'm saying. So it's relative, isn't it?
All of the money really would have to come out of our own pockets or fundraising events like yesterday, but for our own good, nobody else's. So I would be taking that. Well, it's Jenny.
I'll just shout. I've got a big voice. We have a lot of people coming in and using our buildings. Have any of them complained about the car park?
They only complain about how each other park. But they don't complain about, they've never ever complained about the car park.
Thank you. Phil.
When you gave a rough figure, 25,000 for a tarmac surface, people talked about a lattice work. I don't know what the official name is, where you have gravel inside so it can drain, which we always understood you have to have drainage. Was there ever an estimate obtained to get a plastic octagonal or whatever with gravel in it?
I'm not sure what it was talked about during the building project. I don't recall a specific figure being put on it, although there was some sounding out. I do remember the gut reaction was, oh right, quite expensive. I mean, I'm not saying it was much more expensive, but it wasn't it wouldn't have been a big saving against that.
The benefit of that was that you wouldn't have to do the drains underneath, because the water still goes through, because you're not putting a solid surface on it.
Well, it goes through to the extent it goes through now, because you still have the same surface underneath. And at the moment, no, we haven't explored that recently. There was, John Decker, I know, has this recollection of a figure being bandied around during the building project of upper 30s. Now, quite what that was envisaging, I'm not sure. I suspect additional drainage, and this envisaged additional drainage, but just along the boundary with the garden area, because there is already a drainage channel cut as part of the building project that runs the whole length of the driveway. And if you remember, the front lawn was dug up.
Yes.
There's a big attenuation tank under there, which was a planning permission requirement. Those linked together to drain away. But obviously they've got to drain across the car park before they get that far, and you're not quite sure how much, if you put a flat surface down, how much non-porous surface, how much it's going to drain into the back right-hand corner where the little sort of semicircle of flowers and stuff is. So, no, I haven't looked at it in any detail, but I'd be very surprised if it cost only 10,000, and you'd still be asking the same question, I suspect. You know, what is 10,000 better spent on? So I guess of the trustees who will be trustees going forward, got enough of a sense to inform their, because you're going to have to sit down and make a judgment call on this. You've got enough to inform that discussion and decision. Right, I'll say no more about car parking, which just brings me to the any other questions. Are there any other questions on any aspect of the accounts? And,
are we going to talk about the external notice board? Does that come up?
Oh, it can do, yes.
No, I just thought it was on this sheet that I've got here, that's all.
It's on the report. I didn't put it on the agenda as such. That's more a matter of note, I'd say. James, do you want to say something to that? James is the link trustee for the communications group, under which, of course, external signage falls.
Yeah, do you want to unmute mute up the upper one so we don't get the echo? Yeah, there we go. Yeah, we are in the process of designing and commissioning a new notice board for the front of church. Our plan at the moment is it's going to be more or less in the same position, but a bit of a different design. Due to some changes in planning law, we've been informed by the local planning authority that we will have to apply for planning permission before we can remove the current one and replace it, even if the one we replace it with is of the same size. But it's definitely, this is something I know there's a lot of people that are like, oh, it's very out of date, and we're on it. The application is in progress, and then as soon as we've got the okay from the council, then we'll get it ordered, and at that point it's about a 10-week lead time, and then we'll get someone to come and fit it. And if anybody wants to know anything more about the design or more details, then speak to me after, I think.
To pour some concrete into holes to fix it.
If anyone's particularly good at mixing concrete, then give me a shout.
And since it is the solution is necessarily somewhat over the finger in the air budget that was placed on it, it will consume some of the 1,750. Thank you very much, BMDC, for paying for our notice board. Even if we have to give something back to you, the planning permission isn't that expensive, in fact. So it's more the waiting time and all the sort of pathetically detailed questions that we'll get for it. Right. Thank you, Margaret. I'd have left that unsaid otherwise. Which I think brings us to the end of section 6. Oh, you can come back again now, James. James here is masquerading as Jackie Burrows, who sends her apologies. Oh, I should have asked, right, does anyone have any names they want to throw in the pot and say, oh, so-and-so said, please give my apologies?
Got them. Then, okay, thank you. Yes, yeah. David Brown. Oh, yes.
Susan Robinson.
Yeah.
Anne Barker.
Yep.
And where's the register got to? Oh, you've got it.
Shall we, if we put it on here, anybody who hasn't seen it, can they sign up afterwards? Right, well, it'll be on here afterwards. Yeah.
I'll tick you off, Sue.
And Margaret.
And June.
Yeah, David Hartley and June Mallinson.
Yeah.
Right, there we go.
Can I just ask before we go on to safeguarding, has a new treasurer been appointed?
No, the treasurer, along with the secretary and the chair, are determined by the elected trustees and the ex officio trustees. So they can't technically be appointed until they meet. Yeah. And then, if you remember, when we changed the constitution, the chair and the treasurer must be existing amongst the trustees. The secretary can be any old person, really. Like Alan here.
Can I just say, don't fret, Dorothy. I'll be doing the books as before, so we'll still have a hand on our finances.
There is a prospect in mind. But it requires, I mean, I'm not going to sort of say who, what, why, when, because that's a decision for the trustees.
Right, James.
Am I ready to go? Safeguarding?
Give it.
Alan, do you want to?
Yeah. So somebody propose that we accept the new safeguarding policy, please. Right. Anita and Margaret, thank you very much. Anybody, those in favour? Jolly good. Anybody against? No. Thank you very much. Right. And
We good?
thank you, James, for what you've done as well. I did a very extensive, it was days and days, training for safeguarding, which I initially found, in order to continue to be able to function as a minister in the Anglican diocese, and initially I was really quite irritated by it, but the more I went on, the more I realised the importance and the significance of it, and just what can be and could be prevented if more and more people had a real grasp of both the dangers, the opportunities for the unscrupulous, and the vulnerability of those who can be abused in all sorts of ways. So really, it can appear irritating, but it is really, really important. Right, we are going on then to any other business, are we not? We do have one item.
Oh, do we?
We do.
Gosh.
Would you like me to say what the question was, or are you going to give that out as well? Right, okay. We've had one letter in response to the agenda saying, with a question that would like an answer to. I'll hand over to Anne.
Right. I'm not sure the person who wrote this is actually here this morning, but we'll answer it anyway. They say they would like to question the reason for telling the minister or preacher what to preach on and the time spent doing so. This person said, I've recently started to attend regularly at Eldwick, but I find the way the service is presented is quite Anglican. Surely this is an ecumenical Methodist and Anglican church. I would expect the preacher to be led and preach as they felt. I know others from a Methodist background feel the same. So that was the letter that I got, and I'm answering this in my capacity as ex-trustee who looked after the worship and teaching pillar. I'm in limbo at the moment. So I'd like to say thank you for that question, and I gave it quite a lot of thought, so forgive me if I read for some of my notes. We've had preaching themes at this church for some years now, and there are actually several reasons for that. The main reason was to provide some continuity of teaching, given that we have different preachers each week. And however, while we give the preacher the reading that we want them to use and let them know the context, which is the current theme that we're dealing with, we certainly don't tell them what to preach about. It's up to them to take that theme and that reading and through prayer to discern what God's saying to them and to us. And that's just the same as they would if they took their readings from the lectionary or wherever. I think Claire this morning demonstrated that, she sort of went a bit left field with the reading that we gave her, but that was what she wanted to talk about, and we did not tell Claire what to preach about. Several years ago, the trustees checked with Ruth Crompton, who was our Methodist link minister at the time, if it was acceptable to give readings and themes to Methodist speakers, and she said that was absolutely not a problem, and she would expect them to use what we gave them. Another reason for having themes is that at different times on our journey together as a church, we study topics in house groups. And just a couple of examples of this were when we were doing the videos of the Bible course a few years ago. I don't know if people remember that. And we had alongside that a series of sermons working through the Bible to support what we were learning. And also when we did the Jesus-shaped people course, it was a part of that course very much that they wanted us to use the Sunday sermon to support what we were learning in the house groups. In lockdown, we had our series on exile, which we felt was where our church was. And then later on, we had the series of returning when we came back together in church. So it's part of where we are as a church. And so as for guidelines on the length of the sermon, that came about when we started to live stream our services, and we were using this magazine format, which we felt was going to appeal to the widest group of people, because we were aware that both members of the congregation and other people were looking at our services. The feedback that we got was that people quite liked shorter sermons, but since we got back together, I would say that they're getting a bit longer again, and that's not a problem. Regarding the perceived Anglican presentation of the service, I'm not quite sure what that refers to. However, that's certainly not the aim, and I think we sit pretty lightly to liturgy of any kind, either Anglican or Methodist. And that's partly because when we came together as an LEP, it was agreed that we would take some material from both our Anglican and Methodist heritages, but with a view to developing a third way that blended the two of them and was where we were at the time. And that continues to be the aim here. We don't see ourselves so much as an Anglican and Methodist church, but rather as the Eldwick Church. And increasingly, as new people join us, perhaps not from a church background of any sort, increasingly, then they won't be clear whether they are Anglicans or Methodists. They will be members of our church and Christians, most importantly. And I think that I ran this past Brian before I put it before you, and he was very happy with that as an answer. If people have any further questions or need to discuss it further, then that's absolutely fine. Sure.
As your most recent visiting Methodist preacher, I just wanted to give you a reflection on where I came to this. As far as I'm concerned, as long as I know in plenty of time what the theme is, I quite enjoy being said, this is what we're working through, this is the theme, reflect on it. But as Anne's just said, I did go a bit left field because I didn't entirely agree with James, and I don't feel any remorse at doing that. I have been a minister of a church in the past where the church liked to preach to themes, where the worship leaders led large parts of the service, and where I was often told, there's your slot, do your bit. Having been the minister there for a little while, I then said, well, yeah, can I be involved in the planning of this, how it's put together, and got increasingly involved in what songs were chosen, what other material was used to unpack that theme. And the church gradually evolved and invited other preachers who were coming to preach to come and share in conversations about how services were put together, which was a very refreshing way of planning worship. From a personal point of view, I would say that during the pandemic, the highlight for me was that every time I prepared a service, I started with what was the set lectionary for that day and reflected on it from the perspective of that weird situation we'd all found ourselves in. And it's very easy as a minister who preaches often from the lectionary to say, oh, I've done this one, I did it in 3 years ago, 6 years ago, 9 years ago, I've got a service there, I'll just pull it out and redo it. And sometimes that is, I fully admit that's the way I work quite often. I look at what I said 3 years ago in a different place with a different context and then tweak it to fit the present day. It's lovely to start with a blank sheet. And as a minister, I really appreciate the challenge of that. So I don't have any qualms about coming here and being told what the theme is. I did appreciate that with Anita, we had a lot of conversations on email about what music might be used. And I sense that you're willing for any preacher to get involved in that side of things, which is lovely. I think another observation from the Methodist perspective would be that our preachers, some of them have been doing it an awful long time and are very set in a particular model of doing things, and that rattles them a little bit when it's different. I can't do anything about that. They've become preachers, been trained, and have been taught in a particular way. All I can do is commit to trying to ensure that the preachers who are planned here are those who are willing to be versatile and will accept that without being too rattled by it. I don't know the preachers that well yet, but I'm very much want to make it okay for them as well as it okay for you, so that the word that is preached will be what God is calling this church to hear at that time. So I would echo Ruth Crompton's comment that it's not an issue for me as superintendent to say that's the way you do it and that's fine, as long as that communication is very much open and flexible and given in plenty of time. Some preachers prepare their sermons on Sunday evenings, and some, like me, like to do it 3 weeks before. So it's knowing what's coming and not being too shocked. I know there was one preacher who was a little rattled recently because he'd already prepared something on the lectionary and then discovered it was something else. But that's just one of those things. We're a work in progress, and we'll keep working. And it's all about giving God the glory and worship. Okay.
Thanks. Thank you, Claire. And I think what I sense you saying and where I would be coming from is, it's fine to say, please preach on this theme, but as long as what comes out at the end is the product of cooperation and partnership, and nobody feels that they've been imposed to say, you must talk for this, and don't go over 11 minutes and 30 seconds. I mean, I hope that doesn't happen, but, and Anne has explained why some of the things have occurred the way they have. But any other thoughts on that? Any other feelings of sympathy in either direction? Or is that done? That's any other business.
It is.
Well, you shouldn't have stood down. I think, yes, if you can, that's the last item of business on the agenda, as it were, so if you can close with prayer. Thank you, Claire.
Let's pray together. Loving God, we thank you for this time that we have shared. We thank you for your presence, for your love, your guidance and your support for the work that is being done here. And we thank you for this building that is being used for your purposes in this community. More especially, we thank you for the people who are your church here in Eldwick. And we pray that each one will know your presence with them, your encouragement and affirmation in all that they do, and that they will take forward the challenges you present to them and lead this church into new and wonderful possibilities in the year and the years ahead. And so may your blessing be upon this place and all who pass through this building in your name. Amen.
The meeting is now closed.
Yes.
At approximately 1 o'clock.
Thanks again to everybody for turning up.